What's good, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to the final installment of What If Deku Had Microbots. If you guys have been here from part 1 or are even OG fans that watched this series when this originally came out, just know you a real one. And to prove that you're a real one, leave a like on this video because it'll make my day. Who said that? Wait, what? No, but anyways, ladies and gentlemen, before this video starts, I just quickly have to ask, have you guys seen the new Miles Morales movie? Yes, no, maybe? And if you haven't, go watch it. Seriously, before you even watch this video, go watch that. It's so much better. But no, for real, before this video starts, I just want to tell you guys that the movie version of this is going to come out like in a week or something like that. But definitely go check it out and support it when it does. And with no further ado, enjoy.
Hey Ross, sauce it up.
Immediately after this, Deku would look towards the direction of his classmates as they're all perfectly fine, and they would turn towards him and be like, look, can't we just use these microbot things to take us there? We don't feel like doing this. And Deku would say, honestly, I was just about to suggest the same thing. Not like my quirk helps me physically at all. And then they all look at him and they're like, wait, didn't you say you were quirkless? And Deku goes, it's a joke. And then they all look at him and they're like, oh, right. Ultimately then, Deku grabbing his microbots would take everybody over to the area where they're going to pretty much end up arriving, and they would get there before any of the teachers would end up arriving. Deku would immediately be scolded for this because Mandalay would say that that exercise was meant to be a full day's worth of training, but now that they don't have that, they're gonna have to just get a free day, and what's the point of a forest training camp if they're not training? And Deku would be told that unfortunately, even though he broke the system, they all need to go back. But Deku, they have something special in store for him. And Deku would get a punishment so severe that man cannot speak on it themselves. Deku ultimately, after the day would pass, the following day after that, would immediately wake up, go to breakfast, and Mandalay would be giving him this stare of like, why would you like ruin the whole thing? You know, like we had so many things like just trying that we were trying to do, right? And eventually during the training camp, what would essentially happen is that Izuku and Mei, seeing as they can't really upgrade their quirks, they would both be told that they're going to be doing their own thing together. And Mei looks at Deku and would say, all right, what's our plans? How many babies are we going to make this time? What if we upgrade these? And And while that happens, Mei would think to herself that a really cool thing would be if they can cancel quirks with the microbots. Deku would think about that for a second and think that it might be possible to cancel quirks. I mean, they already have developed technology to temporarily dampen quirks, so maybe they could put that technology inside of the microbots and implement that in some sort of kind of way. And Mei would look at him and say, you know, that's exactly what I was thinking. Let's get to work. A few explosions later, they finally get it. And eventually they have quirk canceling microbots. Eventually nighttime would end up passing, and during this time, Koda would end up pretty much being, would be knocked out by the fact that he would see the girls in their swimsuits and all that stuff. And, you know, he passes out. Deku using his microbots would catch him mid-air, and ultimately he ends up finding out about Koda's past, parents, and all of that other stuff, right? Eventually though, the very next day would happen, and while Deku was just straight chilling, out of nowhere, an explosion would be heard from the distance, and Deku would decide that something's definitely going on. He immediately gets on his guard, putting on his hero costume, and he would make his way towards the direction of Koda. Koda, who would have been going off, Deku would end up catching up to, and when Deku would see Koda, he would see him just kind of like throwing rocks into who knows where. Deku looking towards Koda would kind of have like a little bit of a sad expression, seeing that this kid at such a young age already pretty much acts like he hates the world. And Deku goes over to him, sits down and says, hey kid, what's wrong? Koda would just look at him and say, it's none of your business. Get out of here. And Deku would say, well, as much as you say it's not none of my business, and I know it's none of my business, it is my business if I'm going to be a hero. Look, kid, I understand how you feel. A while back, my brother died, and Koda would say, shut up. He's just your brother. You wouldn't know what it feels like to lose your parents. And Deku, once he hears that, would feel rage, sympathy, and he wanted to throw Koda off the cliff all at the same time. He was unsure how to exactly process these feelings, but ultimately, before he could finally decide what he was going to do in response to Koda's attitude, Muscular out of nowhere begins bulking up and would finally show up, telling them that it's his lucky day. Not only does he get to kill some little brat, but a little hero as well. He would smile before saying, "Let's dance." And eventually, Deku, using his microbots, would wave his hand quickly before the microbots would surround Muscular and his quirk would immediately be dampened. He would shrink back to what his normal size is, which by the way is still very imposing and threatening, and he could still leave a number on you if you don't have a quirk. But after this, Muscular was pretty much just a normal human, and Izuku was able to just slam him into the cliffside, knocking Muscular out immediately. Koda, once he gets a good look at him, would say that that's him. He's the guy who killed my parents. And Deku, once hearing that, would have just this sympathetic smile, like sympathetic look at him as he gets down on one knee and says, well, he's not going to hurt anybody anymore. Trust me, kid. Fist bumping Koda, he would immediately take Koda over towards where Aizawa is using his microbots, and immediately he makes his way towards where he can hear a bit of commotion happening. It would be here that Tokiyami would be losing control of his quirk and all that stuff, and Dupli Arms would have been in danger. However, Deku would end up coming in just in time to arrive, and he would end up pretty much saving him, and eventually what would pretty much end up going down is that Deku would help Tokiyami. He would use his inventions, and with his invention of microbots, he would use the fire setting on them to essentially make it so that Tokiyami's dark shadow is just completely useless. Seeing as a bunch of light is the only thing that can calm Tokiyami down, Deku was like the perfect calming thing towards it. Eventually, they end up arriving towards Bakugo and Todoroki, and once seeing this, Deku would tell Tokiyami to use Dark Shadow. Tokiyami would be a bit frightened, but Deku would say that why would he ever need to be frightened? He has Todoroki, Bakugo, and himself there. There's no way Dark Shadow is going to be lost control of right now. And Tokiyami doesn't, eventually destroying Moonfish, before ultimately Todoroki would be forced to shoot flames at Tokiyami, and Tokiyami's Dark Shadow would finally calm down. Because he was there, the target, the person who was originally trying to take Bakugo and all that stuff, would see this, and realizing that Tokiyami is there and his quirk looks very promising and villainous, he would end up kidnapping both Bakugo and Tokiyami. Now, this time around, what would pretty much end up happening is that Deku would jump in the portal, and eventually, as soon as he jumps in through it, an all-out battle with Bakugo, Deku, and Tokiyami facing off against the villains would immediately start. Dabi would at first light a flame in his hands and say, "What do we do, Shigaraki?" And Shigaraki would scratch at his neck before saying, "You know, kid, you cost me a lot of trouble when you threw me into the ice cream machine. So now, I think it's only fair if I throw you into the flames." And Deku would immediately turn to Bakugo and Tokiyami, as Tokiyami using Dark Shadow would create a shield in front of them, not letting them be burned by the flames of Dabi. And ultimately, Deku's microbots would immediately surround Dabi, not allowing him to use his quirk anymore. Eventually, water would be shot out of it, and Dabi, because this water was like shooting at him, his flames were getting completely taken out, and it turns into nothing but fog and mist. This mist would then cover the entirety of the microbots, and Dabi's just whole flow of air and oxygen would begin getting cut out, because fire and water makes a gas that you can't exactly breathe in, right? I mean, you could, but it's not a smart idea. And because of that, Deku would pretty much end up causing Dabi to become obsolete. Since Dabi can't really do anything, Dabi's whole position in this hierarchy would pretty much be void. And eventually, Deku, using his microbots, would create this like sword, like a real sword for himself. Grabbing it, he would then rush towards the direction of Toga, and Toga, using a knife, would come in and slash at Deku. However, Deku would reveal that he has a knife-resistant suit, and then Toga, realizing that she can't make him bleed, would get this expression of "OF," you know what I mean? But Deku ultimately shoots microbots at her, holding her up into the air, and then shakes her violently, causing her to straight pass out. Following this, Bakugo rushes at another one of the villains, Mr. Compress, and shooting a full-powered explosion in his face would knock him out. Eventually, Twice would end up looking towards them and saying that he can't let that happen. Coming in to try to fight them, Tokiyami unleashes Dark Shadow and absolutely demolishes him. And following this, out of nowhere, a black portal would end up arriving in the middle of nothing, right? All for One ends up arriving, and Deku would look at the direction of Bakugo and Tokiyami as All for One shoots black tendrils at them each in almost vital spots, sending them down to the ground, taking them both out. But Deku was able to dodge using his microbots, and as soon as Deku notices that All for One was here, that the main big bad guy of the whole series is standing right in front of him, Deku would ask him what in the world he thinks he's doing here. And All for One would say that he's here for his pupil, of course, before then telling him that his mind is a great one, and how would he like to come with him, work for him, become a villain, receive a quirk. But Deku would look at All for One and say he would never do something like that. He'll never turn to the villain side. He'll never be scum like them. They would never understand why being a hero is so important. And that's not what Tadashi would have wanted, Deku would say, as All for One would smile and say, "Oh, Tadashi, you mean this?" as he unveils one of the Nomus. And All for One would reveal that Tadashi's body would have been the corpse used to make this Nomu, leading to Deku just going out in an all-out rage, and he would immediately cover All for One and all of his microbots before then crushing it, and All for One would reveal that it was nothing but an illusion. Izuku, realizing this, would act too late, and All for One would shoot a powerful beam of air at him. At this moment, all the heroes were barely making their way there, and Deku would be on the ground panting heavily. Eventually, a bunch of tendrils would come flying at Deku. However, putting up a wall of microbots, he'd be able to stop them. And eventually, All for One would just keep Deku on the back foot. Deku trying to get his microbots close as possible to All for One, but All for One has shields and stuff like that. And he even has like abilities that can straight just destroy tons of microbots in one go. Deku's worst opponent was standing right in front of him, and Deku was getting angrier and angrier by the second, knowing that it's up to him to take him down, and that he's not going to let Tadashi be used like some sort of slave. Ultimately though, the Nomu that is inherited to Tadashi's body would rush into Deku, and Deku would get punched straight blank in the face, because Deku can't bring himself to hurt Tadashi, even if it was in a Nomu's body. Deku would wonder to himself why he can't act, why he can't do something. He needs to save his brother, but he just can't do it. And Deku would look towards the direction of All for One as he kind of just accepts defeat for a second, but Tadashi, in a moment, for a split second, would say, "Do it." And Deku, after hearing the voice of Tadashi telling him that, would immediately, using his microbots, create a fist that would grab Tadashi mid-air and crush him. A single tear would come out of Izuku's eyes, and immediately a bunch of microbots from underneath the earth would rise, grabbing onto All for One's leg, which was all that was needed to dampen his quirks. And because All for One has so many quirks, these microbots would have to work in overtime. So a bunch of microbots would cover All for One until eventually all of them do, and All for One's quirks would be completely nullified, eventually leading All for One to be taken straight to Tartarus, and Deku to call in Baymax to heal him. It would be at this moment that Deku would end up having to just clean everything up, and eventually we would have the provisional hero license arc, which I'm completely gonna skip and jump straight into the overhaul arc, the moment where the big three end up walking into the classroom. Just like in the original, Nejire, Tamaki, and Mirio walk in. And by the way, before I continue the story, I'm thinking of doing a what if Naruto had Mirio's quirk. So if you guys see that one on your timeline pop up, definitely go click that video, because I think I'm gonna make it soon. But before that, I'm most likely gonna do what if Deku had a Raven's powers. That one sounds really interesting to me. I watched the Raven short, and honestly, I just completely was lost and enthralled by the powers that Raven has. It's great, just know. But basically what pretty much ends up happening once Mirio gets introduced to the series is he would end up having a couple of encounters with Izuku, and eventually after Mirio takes out the rest of the classroom and would end up telling them all that they need more experience, Deku would end up being the last one left, and Deku would pretty much form a shield around himself of just microbots, right? Once Mirio enters it, Izuku would smirk, knowing that now it's an even playing field. He created a large dome around himself that covers the floor, the top, and the side, so there's no escaping this. And once Mirio phased in it, you can't phase out of it because the quirk dampening effect is on the second that Izuku would see Mirio phase in. Mirio went in to try to like poke at Izuku's eyes, but Izuku was able to dodge, seeing as he's very physically fit and he's been training in martial arts for years. And eventually Izuku would click a button on his suit, which would cause Baymax to end up appearing from behind him. Baymax would then end up coming out equipped with all of his armor, and Mirio would be like, this is bad, before then getting punched by a Baymax who would send him flying through the microbots and would send him crashing towards the wall. Eventually, after Mirio would get sent flying, he stands back up and rushes back at Deku, but Aizawa, using his quirk erasure, would end up taking out Mirio's quirk and telling Izuku to stop, leading Izuku to stop his palm from moving and not leading all of his microbots to rush in at Mirio, right? But after the battle would happen, Deku would be approached by Mirio, who would ask him what in the world that quirk was. And Deku would say that it's not a quirk, he's quirkless actually. They're microbots. Mirio would say that he never thought that somebody was going to be having an ability to like literally take on somebody like him. Like, he's so strong compared to everyone else. Like, he saw what he did to them, including Todoroki and Bakugo. They weren't able to touch him because he was using one for all speed, but Deku, his insane brain was able to think of a counter to that almost instantly. Mirio would tell him that he has so much more potential than most heroes that are out there right now, and he would love it if he would come intern with his master, Sir Night-Eye. He can probably learn a couple of things too. And Deku, after hearing that, would say, you know what, I might just take you up on that offer. Eventually, Deku would make his way towards meeting Sir Night-Eye, and on this particular day, Deku would be told by Sir Night-Eye that all he has to do is make him laugh. Deku would go on to tell a very, very Brainiac-like joke, something that not a lot of other people would get, but when Sir Night-Eye hears it, he just chuckles. He doesn't laugh, but he just chuckles. Afterwards, Sir Night-Eye would end up approving of Deku's interning with his agency, and eventually, as soon as that happens, he would then begin torturing Bubble Girl, leading Mirio to be told by Sir Night-Eye that they could just go out on a patrol, to be careful. And Deku would even be informed of who Overhaul is on the walk. This time around, when they're walking through the alleyway and Eri bumps into Deku, Deku picks her up and asks her what's wrong. But when he looks into the alleyway, Deku sees a man in a strange mask, and Deku would wonder to himself who in the world this is. But it would be at this moment that Mirio's face would show visible concern, and Eri would like pretty much just cuddle into Deku's chest, being afraid clearly. Deku after this would look towards the direction of Mirio, before then just nodding and saying, "Did you hurt this girl?" in a low tone. And Overhaul would begin to take his glove off as he says, "And if I did?" As Deku holds one hand out and in Gaara fashion would just hold a cocoon of just microbots around Overhaul, before then just shaking it violently and causing Overhaul inside of it to just be like straight rattled. Literally rattled, brain rattled. And once Overhaul is done, he's completely knocked out. Deku would immediately escort him straight to the police department, and eventually after that happens, Mirio would tell Deku that that guy that he just took out with ease was somebody that they've been looking for months. Mirio says he would have handled it as well if he would have had the opportunity, but Deku, he just did that like a pro. Mirio's approach would have probably damaged property, but Deku, you're a true hero, he would say. And Deku would say there's no time for that. He then looks at Eri and asks her if she's okay. And with like the biggest, happiest smile of all time, she says she is thanks to him. She would say, "You're my hero." And Deku, hearing that, would just feel this warmness going through his body as he feels to himself that he's somebody's hero, he would think. And that's all that matters to Deku. Following this, Deku would look towards the direction of Mirio and say that they should probably take this girl to a safe place. Before afterwards they do so, and eventually after all this altercation is handled, eventually we would cut back to UA with everybody talking about how there's going to be a really cool festival for all the classes to show off what they've learned and, you know, just perform for the people. Eventually Eri would end up being told about this, and she would be one of the first people to arrive. She would watch the concert as it's happening, and Deku from the corner of his eye notices the gentle criminal from the top corner. Seeing as this Deku wasn't going to forget the preparations because like he's a lot smarter than the canon original Deku, once he sees a glimpse of gentle criminal, he immediately using his hand, even though he was mid dancing, using his mind, he just controls his microbots to rush in at Gentle, grab him, slam him into the ground, create like this gigantic fist, punch Gentle, and send him crashing through 3 trees. People would hear the commotion, but ultimately Deku would rush over towards Ojiro, or no, not Ojiro, but that one girl with the things on her ears, the rock girl, I forgot her name. But ultimately he rushes and grabs the mic and says, "You guys ready?" As suddenly his microbots would come in and form this like gigantic UA banner, like cool thing that would catch everybody's attention, and they would all just immediately begin cheering, with Deku saying, "Well guys, it's been fun, but that's it for What If Deku Had Microbots." The revamped version, right? The new version with the better mic, the better music, and gameplay in the background, right? Even though y'all probably didn't watch it, you know, I get it, I understand. I usually don't watch gameplay either, but you know, it would mean the entirety of the world to me if you guys were to leave a like on today's video, seeing as it's gonna help your boy out a ton in the long run, and I'll be catching you guys all later. Peace.